Welcome to Two Tall Guys Talking Sales, where today's episode dives into a game-changing framework for business growth with special guest Steve Wittal. If you've ever wondered how to turn your sales process into a scalable, repeatable engine for revenue generation, you're going to love Steve's 4 buckets: desirability, clarity, predictability, and deliverability. You'll hear how to assess where your product truly stands in the market and why clarity in your messaging can make or break a deal. Stay tuned. This episode is packed with insight that could reshape the way you approach sales strategy.
We're back, and today we are blessed with a wonderful guest here, one of our Canadian partners and peers, Steve Wittal. Steve, we're so tickled to have you here. You have a wealth of experience, not only in the sales acceleration community, but also in the startup community. Lots of things in your background that are going to make this conversation very robust. So for all of our listeners out there, this is an episode you're not going to want to miss, because Steve brings to the forefront lots of insight, experience, and forward thinking that can help you and your team get better now. Steve, we're glad you're here. And Sean, good to hear your voice.
It's nice to be with you guys. Kevin, Sean, thanks for having me on.
So Steve, you've been an advisor of people in startups and young companies and companies who are trying to figure out how to grow for a while. Is there any words of wisdom that you'd like to start off with? What do you tell a brand new customer, a brand new client of your company? What do you tell them about how to get going and how to grow and how to think about growth? What's your secret there?
I don't know if I'd say it's a secret, but the first thing that I always share is the most important thing to establish at the start is leadership. And I say that because in my case, I'm almost always an intervention. In other words, whatever I'm going to share, however my advice is going to fall, it's going to mean change. And people don't react well to change if they aren't first understanding of you, built a little trust with you, if there isn't followership. So leadership is the first thing to establish, and then you can start to implement whatever the agenda might be.
Interesting. So when you talk about implementing agendas, all of the agendas that I think small business owners first adhere to are their own. How am I going to grow my business? How am I going to grow my revenue, profit, headcount, something? Can you dial that in a little bit more and talk about how they develop that first good agenda that's really going to help them scale? Can you help them think through that at a 50,000 foot level?
Sure. I think people start businesses for various reasons. Often it's about freedom and the ability to build a better life for themselves and their family. And then they get into it and they can't understand why it's not working or not working the way that they thought. And oftentimes that's when we all are brought in. In my case in particular, I like to rise up to 90,000 feet and help to make sure that we understand the problem we're trying to solve. I worked for a CEO years ago that was very fond of saying, a problem well-defined is a problem solved. So in that spirit, I'd like to share a little bit about how I go about the process of helping them solve the problem, but more clearly identify what it is. And I put it into 4 buckets. Those are desirability, clarity, predictability, and deliverability. And I want to expand on those, but I wanted to stop there for a moment, give you a chance to respond.
I think those are great buckets. Do you want to take them in order, or do you want to start with desirability, or do you want to jump in the middle?
Yeah, and the way I go about this, Sean, and thanks for asking, is trying to figure out what are the right questions to ask. We all know that sales is about identifying the problem or identifying the pain. So is that true for a brand? And what I mean by that is if a company is clever enough to have determined their ideal customer profile, or ICP as we like to slang it, then it's really diving into what is the problem that we solve for that client or that ICP? Or what is the risk that we help to mitigate? And then diving a little deeper into that, what's behind that problem? What's driving that problem or that risk? And is it getting worse? And how is it getting worse for them? And then, of course, we want to describe how the problem is frustrating them. So what we're trying to determine is, do we have a must-have product? Do we have a useful product? How do we need to think about desirability because that drives all the next elements of our strategy.
So let's lean into that. I want to back up for a minute because a lot of our listeners, we assume, might be driving down the road and they heard you say those 4 key areas one time. So hit me. Desirabilities first, and then you're going to go to clarity,
predictability, and deliverability. So I'll define each one. Desirability, that may be obvious based on what we just said, but how desirable is your product? Clarity, can we articulate that desirability? What is the message? How do we construct the message? Once we get those 2 pillars clear, then we can talk about predictability, which is, can we scale this solution? And then the 4th one, in deliverability, does it actually do what we think it's going to do for the client? In fact, does it drive enough value that we can retain them for the long haul?
Interesting. So I like how we're making those interconnected, but also order specific, meaning you can't jump to propose until you go through discover and scope, right? You can't skip steps in the process. So before we move on to clarity, how does someone know if they've skipped all the core elements of desirability if they're a CEO doing a self-analysis?
Sure. I think they've rated themselves in terms of desirability. Where do they sit on that curve? So if you think Uber was perhaps not so desirable at the start of their journey, but now you think you're going to go somewhere, you take out your phone, you push a button. It's just so ingrained now. So I think that they've created some kind of clarity around their desirability, foreshadowing the next point.
Yeah, that's interesting. So if you're a must-have product that you sell or a nice-to-have product, and that's a big deal in the sales process at that point, let's talk about clarity, right? I think of the 4 that you talked about, clarity is probably the one that's going to be the most difficult for people to wrap their heads around. That's just my gut.
So again, it starts with a series of questions. You're right, Sean. It is more difficult. I heard your episode featuring Kelly Crandall not too long ago talking about value proposition. She's alluded to a lot of this stuff, but clarity starts with understanding the client's status quo. What is current state? We talk a lot in sales about the gap theory, the theory of where you are, where you're trying to get to. That's the client's dilemma. And the gap in between those things is what we solve for and what clarity helps to define. So we move from, can we articulate the client's status quo? Can we quantify, ideally in dollars, the cost of the client doing nothing? And I'd heard you mention this at one point, Sean. The vast majority of sales stall because of no decision. And so being able to take the client on that journey from here's where you are to here's where you're going to get to, and here's what it's going to cost you if you don't take the journey. Here's the implication. So then can we show the client how they can go from this problematic current state to this opportunity-filled future that our solution helps to create? And can we describe the client's options to fix the problem? We want to occupy that trusted advisor chair. And if we're the advisor, then even though we're advocating for our solution, we need to walk through what are your options. And if you're sitting in that chair, you are in fact an advisor. You're building trust and you're building credibility with the person that's across the table from you. And then it ends with, and here's what it looks like when the solution is fully implemented. And that's what I would describe as nailing the clarity piece.
It's interesting you say that. And I'm going to jump in here real quick. And I'm going to broaden the audience a little bit because that's the same place that a good salesperson, regardless of the product that they sell and the industry that they're in, wants to be with their customers. So
Sure.
For those people listening to our podcast, you actually want to be in that advisory role. You want to be a trusted advisor. There is no better situation in sales than when the customer goes to you, goes, I have a problem. Do you think you can give me some advice on how to solve this problem? That's the best situation to be in. And when you get that situation, go home and stop on the way home and buy a bottle of champagne because you just hit nirvana. Right?
And Powerball ticket.
There you go. Maybe a part. Yeah, you're probably lucky is right at that point. For me, it's a really nice bottle of tequila. Just
Sure.
put the frame on that, or maybe a nice bottle of bourbon. But it's definitely a time to celebrate because you have reached a point that a lot of salespeople don't get to. So We're going to be running close on time here, so let's get right into predictability.
You just got to add one point. I think the mindset of the trusted advisor is I'm going to add value, even if it doesn't mean there's benefit for me personally. So predictability, can we scale our solution? So now we have a definition of desirability. We know where we sit. We have clarity in terms of our positioning. Predictability, can we scale this solution? So this is where we are defining the buying process and then matching our sales process to that buying process. Is it scalable? Can we build messaging to drive leads consistently to the business? What is our marketing strategy to generate those leads? Do we have a structured onboarding and retention plan to ensure customers experience value immediately and over the course of time? And having value being captured immediately, that initial win, is so important. So that's why it's so important for us to define the onboarding process for a client, not let it happen by chance, if you will. We need to be intentional. So that's predictability. In deliverability, of course, we're trying to figure out, does our solution actually do what we think it will? And how many of us are actually reaching out to get that voice of the customer through the process to understand, are we really getting it right? What are the friction points? Friction is an erosion. It's a profit eroder in business. So understanding those friction points is vital and critical. So in deliverability, how do we validate our clients receiving the value that we expect them to receive? And do we ask for referrals a third of the way through that journey? Because that's when excitement tends to be highest. And referrals are the best validator, of course, of value. Where I often see problems, when the CEO says, calls one of us, me in particular, in this particular example, and says, I've got a sales problem. These buckets embrace more than sales, but they are critical to achieving results in your revenue strategy. And where I see problems is when the leaders inside of these businesses or the CEO, him or herself, doesn't have a unified view of all four buckets.
Yeah. And on those four buckets, and I told you this is going to run by fast. We're already here almost at 13 minutes. These buckets all come together in a way that they not only collide, but they also create definition between those unique stages. They morph into some of the more common language we might call as unique value or unique selling proposition, strategic or true north, or outcome or goal, true north, big BHAGs of sorts. But then also the sales playbook and how things move day in, day out, and how we operate as a business. So what other pieces of the strategy do you see melding together? And then we'll move to a wrap up here.
Sure. I think those are the key ones. And the things that you just mentioned, Kevin, they all shake out from having this clarity. Business moves fast. We like to say in sales, at the speed of trust. And I believe that a lot of, at least in my marketplace, a lot of small business owners don't slow down to take the time to thoughtfully ask these questions, get them right. And then what else shakes out of this? Quite frankly, it depends. It depends what you learn through this exercise.
Amen to that. And to bring this to a head here, I'm looking at desirability, clarity, predictability, deliverability. When all those things come together, the CEOs, the businesses, and the customers all know where the true value lies. When you've dotted all those I's, it makes you a market-facing product market fit. Steve, this is great. We've spent right at 15 minutes here getting inside the mind of Steve. And I know you're from Kitchener, Ontario, which is a suburb of Toronto. So for all of you out there, grab a map, know your geography, know where Steve lives. But if they want to get in touch with you, Steve, tell us how they can get in touch with you.
The easiest way is to find me on LinkedIn. I'm active there.
Fantastic. And your business name and email, just in case people want to connect you directly.
Launch Sales Advisory and swittal@salesxceleration.com.
Fantastic. That's Sales Acceleration spelled with an X instead of an EXL. Good. Steve, thank you for your time today. Sean, bring us home.
So all of that information about how to reach out to Steve, who has got a wealth of information, and you really need to reach out to him if you thought that you were curious about this whole DCPD. Reach out, because Steve has got a wealth of knowledge, wealth of information. I know that I ask Steve questions on a fairly regular basis about how to do things. There's lots of knowledge in his head, lots of experience. For many of you listening, that's across the border, but that's okay. You can do that. The phones work going across the border. It works just fine. So does email.
Tariff-free.
There you go. There you go. Tariff-free. So reach out and ask a question, get to know Steve a little bit. Thank you very much, Steve. We really do appreciate it. All of your contact information will be in the show notes. So if you are driving right now, don't look at the show notes. Wait till you pull over. Wait till you get to wherever you're going. And maybe the next time you take a break between machines, look at the show notes and write down how to get a hold of Steve. I think you'll really enjoy talking to him. So Steve, thank you very much for your time. Bye.
Thanks for having me, guys.
What a great episode, Sean, Kevin, and Steve. Today's conversation offered a powerful look into the clarity bucket, arguably one of the most overlooked yet critical pillars in a sales strategy. Understanding how to clearly articulate your value to a prospect while quantifying the cost of doing nothing is a masterclass in value selling. Steve showed us how clarity bridges the gap between where your customer is and where they want to be, and how your messaging must guide them across that divide. One significant actionable takeaway from today's episode is to audit your sales approach using Steve's 4 buckets: desirability, clarity, predictability, and deliverability. This simple but profound exercise will highlight hidden gaps in your revenue generation efforts and help you realign your messaging, your sales process, and your delivery with what your market actually values. Don't let this insight slip away. Schedule time this week to run your own 4-bucket assessment while it's fresh on your mind. If you're looking for help improving your sales management, strengthening your sales processes, or scaling your team's success, Sean and Kevin are just a conversation away. Their contact details, along with Steve's, are in the show notes. And while you're there, be sure to take the quick sales assessment. It's a fast way to see how your team stacks up and where there's room to grow. Be sure to subscribe to Two Tall Guys Talking Sales on your favorite podcast player, so you never miss an episode packed with business acumen and actionable sales strategies. Until next Tuesday at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time, happy selling!